Greetings, royal queens and kings. It's your host, Queen Tulsa. Welcome back to the Queen Tulsa Show. I will be your captain today. I don't have a co-captain, but you'll have to stick around and find out who that is. First and foremost, if you're not subscribed to the channel, I need you to press that subscribe button down below and also follow me at www.queentulsa.com. And actually, you don't even have to do the www, just do queentulsa.com. Also, if you're not subscribed to the show, set your notifications to all so that you don't miss any of the hot topics and fire content. And go on and press that subscribe button over on that website so you'll get all the notifications. Queens and Kings on the agenda today. We have Jordan Neely, rest in peace. The system failed Jordan Neely. Mayor has caught in the cold due to Marine deleting him. And the Neely family is very upset, in which I feel like they have every right to be at this moment. We have a lot to get into, so let's get into it.
Girls can't never say how. Girls can't never say they need it. Girls can't never say nah. Girls can't never say they want it. Girls can't never say how. Girls can't never say they need it. Girls can't never say nah. Oh nah. Give it to me like you need it, baby. Want you to hear me screaming, have it breathing. I don't need a reason, baby. I want it till you can't buy. I can get it to you right, baby. I wanna be I can be real good. We don't get any feelings. Hey, I need some love.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, first and foremost, this is fair use. And before we start, let's go ahead and get into our disclaimer. Disclaimer: copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips and balance in favor of fair use. This video was made for entertainment purposes and is transformative in nature. Okay, so as we all know, Jordan Neely was deleted on the subway in New York. Jordan Neely was a Michael Jackson impersonator, and his life was taken away from him so short. Jordan was homeless at the time, and it happened on the subway. So just a trigger warning. Jordan was an impersonator of Michael Jackson. And a Marine veteran, decided that he was going to take matters in his own hands. Jordan Neely was not a harm to anybody. He was simply asking for food. And let's speak about the system that failed Jordan Neely. Not long ago, on 6th Avenue in Chelsea, I walked past a man in a black coat who was hunched over, licking the sidewalk. He murmured, to himself and passersby. For a moment, it occurred to me that he might be having a psychotic episode. Then I ducked into a deli, bought lunch, and went to the office. Should I have called 911? Maybe. The thought didn't linger long. This kind of thing happens all the time. Recently, aboard an F train en route to Brooklyn, I saw a young man reach both hands into his pants and start. He wore a dirty sweater that was pulled over his head, and his socks were halfway off his feet. There was a cup of coffee and a chicken bone under his seat. An older man with two fish direct bags loaded with clothes and takeout containers was stretched out nearby. The young man was crying, and the older man slept. Several strappingers were watching, but it was late at night, and no one seemed particularly interested or concerned. Later, I asked an inpatient psychiatrist at a local hospital about the incident. There was little I could have done, he said, adding that the young man likely would have would wound up at a hospital sooner or later. So perhaps he had recently been discharged from one. More often than not, people experiencing acute mental distress in public places get picked up by the police or an ambulance and are taken to the emergency room. Sometimes they find their way to a hospital on their own. Other times, something awful happens first. On Monday, May 1st, aboard an F train in Manhattan, a black man named Jordan Neely started yelling. He shouted, "I want food." He shouted, "I'm not taking no for an answer." He shouted, "I'm ready to unalive." And then Daniel Penny, a 24-year-old Marine veteran who was white, pinned Neely down and started to strangle him. A second man held Neely's wrist. Another passenger filmed the incident on a cell phone. Others were calling 911. Penny had Neely in a chokehold, and Neely's body went limp. Someone said, "He'll be all right." 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. The train had pulled into the Broadway-Lafayette subway station. The doors had opened, and a few passengers drifted onto the platform upstairs into the spring afternoon. Below ground, a police officer wearing blue gloves began chest compressions. Neely was pronounced unalived. The city's medical examiner ruled the unalivement a homicide. The NYPD questioned Penny, then released him. His lawyers say that he was acting in self defense. "We don't know exactly what happened here," Mayor Eric Adams said. Afterward, "We cannot just blankly say what a passenger should or should not do in a situation like that." Kathy Hochul, the governor of New York, said. There's consequences for behavior. Was she talking about Neely or the man who unalived him? Many locals knew Jordan Neely. He liked to hang out in Times Square where he would perform, dressed up like Michael Jackson. The side slide, the crotch grab, the moonwalk were his signature moves. Law enforcement and public health officials also knew him. He had been arrested more than 40 times, mostly for petty offenses such as loitering and trespassing. He had a history of mental illness, and that Monday afternoon, he had reportedly been throwing garbage at other passengers. Reflecting on the incident, the inpatient psychiatrist who has worked in hospitals in New York for more than 15 years told me a couple of months ago a mentally ill man threw a juice box at my kid in the subway at Union Square, where there was a police presence, and no one intervened. The man walked out of the station. Neely was unalive. It's just very strange. The arbitrariness of it, he said. The psychiatrist went on to tell me that Neely had been involuntarily hospitalized at Bellevue in 2021. Neely was admitted to the hospital's forensic psychiatry unit on the 19th floor, where doctors and nurses treat patients who have been recently arrested or incarcerated on Rikers Island. Then, like so many other patients, Neely walked out of the hospital and into the street. For a while, he lived at a homeless shelter. Sometimes he stayed with his Aunt Carolyn and her wife, Whitney, at their apartment in Washington Heights, near where he grew up. In January, the two moved upstate and Neely decided not to go. He said that he didn't want to burden them. In early April, in early April, outreach workers spotted him on the subway. He urinated in front of them, and they called the police. Carolyn told the Post that she had tried for years to get the judge and doctors to help. The whole system just failed him. She said he fell through the cracks. There are more than 200,000 residents of New York City living with severe mental illness. Roughly 5% of them are homeless. That's 13,000 people with schizophrenia, major depressive and bipolar disorders, or other significant mental or behavioral health diagnoses, sis, all of whom regularly spend the night at a shelter, in the subway, on the street. They're the ones you recognize, the people whom, for the past 50 years, every mayor has either tried to help, harass, or hide from view. Rudy Giuliani's cops were known to chase people out of Midtown, forcing them into the Bronx and Queens. Michael Bloomberg largely avoided public initiatives that address mental illness. Bill de Blasio allocated almost $1 billion for a mental health plan, but it was criticized for failing to track outcomes or prioritize treatment for those who needed the help. For those who needed help the most. Last November, Adams, citing a crisis, citing a crisis we all crisis we see all around us, announced at a press conference that homeless people with mental illness would be removed from the streets and the subways against their will if necessary by the police and other city employees. Advocates were outraged. Norman Siegel, the former head of the New York Civil Liberties Union and a longtime friend of the mayor, said just because someone smells, because they haven't had a shower for weeks, because they're mumbling, because their clothes are disheveled, that doesn't mean they're a danger to themselves or others. Rumors spread quickly. Were the police about to start rounding up people who simply appeared to be mentally ill? How many were going to be detained? 2 weeks later, lawyers sought to halt the initiative in a courtroom downtown. An attorney for the city who was defending the mayor's plan said, as far as anyone in this room knows, the initiative hasn't changed anything. The judge asked, so the purpose of the press conference was to do what? To announce the fact that the mayor has taken the initiative of providing further guidance to the agencies about what is permitted under current law so that they can take action to protect New Yorkers under circumstances that the law permits. Adams' policy, in other words, was more of the same. In 1987, Mayor Ed Koch announced a broad interpretation of the New York state law that permitted him to hospitalize the loonies and crazies around town. In the decades since, police and EMS workers have regularly transported homeless people with apparent mental illness to hospitals against their will. That's just a part of the job. Violent crime, parking tickets, heart attacks, the unsheltered woman in a wheelchair at Penn Station who is taken to Bellevue every few months after creating a public disturbance. The man with four large black suitcases who is picked up for zigzagging through traffic in Brooklyn and sent to the psychiatric emergency room at Kings County Hospital. The woman with schizophrenia who believes that the French government bought a church on Fifth Avenue and granted her the legal right to live there. One EMT who has worked on ambulance crews across the city for the past 20 years told me, if the person is out of their mind, if you can see the person is not all there, the police will call for us and we'll come and take them. In the course of reporting this article, someone interviewed dozens of EMT paramedics, police officers, nurses, social workers, emergency room doctors, and inpatient psychiatrists, most of whom requested anonymity in order to speak openly about the people in their care. Here's how it happens. An EMT and her partner parked the ambulance. Cops call for it, the bus, and evaluate the scene for safety. Does the individual have a weapon? Where's the nearest egress? Then she'll put on a pair of purple nitrile gloves and make a cautious approach. She'll say, "What's going on today, sir?" Or, "Ma'am, how are you feeling tonight?" The person might respond with a mumble, a shout, or the formality you'd expect in a job interview. Often the person will say, "I don't want to tell you my name." So the EMT will smile and offer her own. She'll say, "You're not in trouble. I just want to know why you're standing in the middle of the road. Can you come with me to the sidewalk, please? I'm here to listen." Or maybe the person is already ripping the hair from his head and trying to escape the encounter by tossing the EMT stretcher into the street. In that case, a paramedic can use a cotton sling to tie the patient's wrists to his ankles and inject a drug such as the sedative midazolam or the anesthetic ketamine. But not every ambulance crew has a paramedic. One might be 10 or 20 minutes out. So in the meantime, the EMT who isn't allowed to inject those drugs will have to get creative. You want cake? You want cookies? You want a cigarette? Lies and threats, carrots and sticks, anything to get them on their way to the nearest hospital. The EMT told me. I don't want to use the word manipulative, but you have to figure out a way to just blank get them in the ambulance. At the hospital, the patient is evaluated by a team of nurses and doctors in the emergency department. In New York City, this happens 70,000 times a year. A little more than a half of these patients, the ones in the worst shape, are then taken to the psychiatric unit. The hospital's job is to evaluate, stabilize, treat, discharge. Just as you don't depart the ICU while you're having a stroke or bleeding out, you don't leave the psychiatric unit while you're in the throes of psychosis. Some people stay for months before being transferred to a state run psychiatric hospital. Others are discharged after only a few days or are never admitted at all. Every day at Bellevue, the largest city run hospital, there are usually 5 or 6 patients downstairs in the psychiatric emergency department waiting for a bed. The average stay in the psychiatric unit is 13 days. One reason hospitals discharge people so quickly is that there are not enough inpatient psychiatric beds. High quality psychiatric care is not as profitable as specialized spinal surgeries and hernia repairs. Almost every patient who comes in this way has a serious underlying condition: bipolar disorder, major depression, schizophrenia, that even a couple of weeks surrounded by nurses, doctors, and social workers cannot fix. In the late 80s, following a legal challenge to coaches' involuntary hospitalization initiative, one judge described the city's approach as revolving door mental health, that is, forcibly institutionalized, forcibly medicate, stabilize, discharge back into the same environment, and then repeat the cycle. 35 years later, the vocabulary that's used to describe the city's mental health care system hasn't changed. It's a revolving door. A cop who was working an overtime shift on a subway platform in Clinton Hill told me, "We bring them in, and the hospital just discharges them." She and her partner had both of had a few streaks of gray in their tidy black hair and wore matching NYPD beanies. The second cop sighed in and out. She said, "I'm not sure anything we do is going to help if the hospitals keep letting them go." The hospitals keep letting them go because they have often had to. Patients can always refuse treatment or ask to be released. Compelling someone to stay requires a court order from a judge, and the legal standard is high. The hospital must prove that the patient poses an immediate threat to himself or to others, and that is his judgment is so impaired by his illness that he doesn't even understand that he needs help. A psychiatrist at a city-run hospital sketched out a hypothetical scenario. Two men with schizophrenia arrive in the back of an ambulance, escorted by police. Both are living at homeless shelters, and neither has eaten about 5 days. A doctor asks each man, "Why are you starving yourself to unalivement?" The first says, "The voice of God is commanding me to go on a hunger strike." The second replies, "The food at the shelter is disgusting. I'll eat when I have money to buy something good." Both men have a serious mental illness. Only the first will be made to stay at the hospital against his will. The second can walk out the door. On a Tuesday morning, I visited the second floor of a shady building on Rockaway Avenue in Brownsville. Social workers were sitting in blue office chairs surrounded by large rubber band containers filled with granola bars, body lotion, sweatpants, toilet paper, detergent, and chocolate chip cookies. The group is one of 31 intensive mobile treatment teams, which care for the city's frequent flyers and heavy hitters. The 400 or so men and women who are regularly and repeatedly admitted and discharged from city and state psychiatric units or released from Rikers, where a fifth of incarcerated people have been diagnosed as having a severe illness. IMT teams help people who have history of chronic street homelessness and violent behavior. A psychiatric diagnosis is not on the list of admission criteria, but at least all IMT clients have one. Just after 10 o'clock, someone turned the volume on a TV in the office, and the team's leader, Lauren Schultz Capes, who wore blue jeans, yellow Nikes, and a silver heart necklace, began the day by giving an update on their 27 clients. Tony was living in a shelter and recently went to a dentist appointment. JB Fresh had been staying at a nursing home and didn't like the food. Bashteva was transferred to a state run hospital on Staten Island. Alex requested a Russian Orthodox Bible with large type and has become obsessed with juice. Marquise was scheduled to receive his psychotropic medicine via intramuscular injection at a veterans hospital. Marissa had court that afternoon. She didn't seem to understand why it was wrong for her to pepper spray the emergency room. Skulls Scapes explained, and she said, "Why is it such a big deal?" So we'll see how court goes today. The list went on. Fantasia was a little internally preoccupied again. Casper was still street homeless. Raymond was still missing. Renee was doing all right. Okay. Marwan was back at Bellevue. He's a weird mix of really lucid at times and then really not understandable. One of the social workers said, Scos Capes added, and he's really loud. So, child, this is just an overview of how people are looking at individuals that have shortcomings. The mayor sounded off. This is just a really, really tough story for me. And I feel like nobody should have their life taken away from them for asking for food. You want to talk about, somebody having an illness, that the guy that did that to him, he should definitely get the unalivement penalty or worse. So on that note, let's go ahead and give a moment of silence to Jordan Neely. My heart goes out to his family. I can't imagine. Can't imagine. Let's go on a moment of silence. All right. Life is not promised. Life is not promised. And if we can, this is a suggestion, not a command. But if you're in the New York City area and you are traveling, I would, just if you can, not asking you to go out your budget, but if you can, just have you some snacks in a bag or something. You may not have enough for everybody, but go by the dollar store, load up a bag of snacks or something. That way, if someone is out hungry, okay, you might have a pack of crackers in your pocket. Oh, here you go. This is all I have, but there you are. It's the small things that matter. It's the small gestures. I mean, a man was crying out because he was hungry. whether if he had a mental disability or not. When somebody isn't right for you, God will continuously cause them to hurt you until you're strong enough to let them go. I think we've all been in a place or know somebody that's been in a place where they had to depend on other people's help, right? Or depending on someone. If you can't help somebody, move on. Because this act right here led to a young man that was very talented, that was looked over, that was brushed off. That's why I say all the time, let's make sure our mental health is in order, people. We see something, we got to say something. Look at the people that was sitting right there that was just, I mean, just standing around. You have him in a chokehold, you have someone pinning his legs, and then you have someone recording this black man. We had already saw that happen to George Floyd people, except for it wasn't with his hands. George Floyd had the knee on him. So now we moving from knees to hands. I have no understanding when it comes to that, people. So we going from a knee to a hand to somebody wrapping their arms around this man's hand and sent him to his maker. This has got to stop. This has got to stop. If you see this going on, white, black, any race, are you kidding me? Y'all just sat there and watched a whole unalivement. It's a bit too much. Please leave your comments in the chat. Also, check us out on queentulsa.com. On that note, until next time, so long. queentulsa.com.